Hi, my name is Jamal Story, and I'm a dancer, aerialist, and novelist. And I'm excited to sit here with Donald Byrd, who is an inspiration, a friend, a mentor, a pop, all of those things in dance, and a current and former employer, depending on what month it is. And I'm excited to have this conversation with him today about the erasure of blacks in dance. Hi, Donald Byrd.
Hey, Jamal Story.
How are you, Donald Byrd?
I'm generally really good. Uh,
Okay.
yes, I'm generally really good.
Okay.
It's at the end of the season, so I have some fatigue. It's been a long stretch. Also, the pandemic year, so a lot of things, the kind of compounding of work and the kind of the reality of what the past 14 months or so, 16 months were about. So,
Right,
but
right,
I'm good.
right,
I'm
right.
generally good.
Okay, I'm
I'm
glad to
still
hear that.
kicking, as they say.
Still kicking, still kicking.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't know about you is that you were a thespian first. Like you were, I mean, I would say, um, hardcore, really studied uh, theater person at one
Mhm.
point before you started dancing. Um, and a lot of that information about how to be on stage and what it means to be in theater sort of filters into the work that you do in a really profoundly good way, I think. Um, but what was the moment? What is it that made you fall in love with dance? What was your what was the thing that first made you feel all the feelings about movement?
Well, there are a lot of moments I think, and they were all kind of crammed into a really kind of uh, short period of time. I would say the first um, uh, kind of experience that way was not dancing itself, but I grew up in Florida, and so
Mm-hmm.
watching Florida A&M marching band when I was a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was just the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. Anytime they would be a parade or something, and they would be doing their thing, and I was just like, oh, I want to do that. I mean, I was like little, but I still go,
Mm-hmm.
I want to do that. So this idea of marching bands being a kind of dance for me at a
Sure.
very early age, and that also it was like as FAMU, so it was like all black people,
Mm-hmm.
and so later,
Mm-hmm.
what happened for me was I was an assistant drum major when I was 14 to our high school marching band, and then the following year I became the drum major. So I was the drum major for 3 years. So I
You were
lived
the
in the
drum
world.
major?
I was a drum major, so I lived in the world of marching bands for 3 years, and so um, and I wasn't particularly tall and so it's the marching band that really kind of got me excited about it. Well, later I did, and I think all of this kind of paints the picture of me and dance. So I always liked dancing. I would dance around in our living room. I loved watching old movies on TV, and
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of was fascinated by those musicals and dancing. And so I would dance. If somebody was over, I'd start dancing, and so dancing was like a really central to I think my identity as a young person, even though I didn't know that it had so profoundly touched me. I think when
Mm-hmm.
I studied tap dance around that same time of being like 14 or so. Around 14, I started tap dance, and but I think like pivotal moments was when I arrived at Tufts
Uh-huh.
and early on in the first week or so that I was there, I'm standing up, and I remember where I was. I was standing up by the bookstore, which was on a hill, and I look down and I see this really beautiful young black woman walking, and I don't know, the way she moved was so extraordinary to me. I just feel like, oh my God, look at her. And so I went running down the hill, and I ran up to her, and like this, like, and I said, "Oh my God, you look so amazing. Why do you move the way you do?"
Mm-hmm.
That's what I said to her. I was very kind of overwhelmed by her grace and beauty and all of that. And she looked
Right.
at me and she said, "Ballet dancer." And I went, "Oh, So then I sought her out at dinner to find out more what that was. And so she proceeded to tell, and so then every meal, I would always look for her so she could tell me more about dance. After that, I decided that I really wanted to study dance really formally. And
Mm-hmm.
so there was a kid who told me that they offered scholarships to boys at this ballet school in Cambridge. So I went there and took class, and then I got a scholarship. They offered me a scholarship, so I did. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that was just kind of it. I just pursued dance relentlessly. My obsessive nature took over around dance, and so that kind of way of being with dance, I that's continued to this day.
We were talking about um, dance, about black dance, about black dancers and black bodies, and sort of the persistence of black movement and black expression. That kind of creativity coming through the body is not going anywhere. It's been around forever, and it's going to stay around, and in spades. And and I
I
and
want
I
to
was
I want to interject something there. You
go
said it's
for it.
not going anywhere, but I think that's not necessary. It says
Necessarily true.
I'm pros. It's not necessarily true, and it's not necessarily true because it depends on where uh, black dancers and black bodies exist. So if you are in education in white institutions and white
Mm-hmm.
spaces, then there is a conscious attempt to kind of take the blackness away, or what we think of as the blackness. First
Mm-hmm.
of all, the diminishing of black bodies by these institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have this isn't right, and blah. Like a friend of mine says, like uh, uh, Ananya Chatterjee, about when she came to America. She's from South Asia, and about what she calls the tyranny of the pointed foot. That the pointed foot is an aesthetic that is based in Western dance techniques, but it doesn't exist quite that way in other places. And so we are
Sure.
taught that the pointed foot has a certain is the where you want to
Value.
achieve the value. And so if you are a black person and you don't have the feet that do that and do all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, then you feel somehow diminished. But the thing is that the reality is, when you watch people move, sometimes a pointed foot is not necessary, and that's not what it's about. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is that it's a kind of institutional erasure that kind
Mm-hmm.
of that,
Mm-hmm.
that happens. And so, I mean, even in the environments that I trained and learned in originally, it was like that's all that got thrown at me. I took what they call Afro back
Mm-hmm.
then. But
Right.
basically, it was still ballet and modern and jazz, and you have to point your feet, you have to turn out, you have to do all
Mm-hmm.
of those things. And those are great things, but they are not the only things. And so there was no acknowledgement that perhaps black bodies do things differently,
Mm-hmm.
and to have that be valued. And so I think black people of my generation that dancers and is that we have to create that value for ourselves and kind of resist, in some ways, the notion of this kind of attempt uh, to minimize and erase the aesthetic and the beauty of the black body and how it does things. And so, and I would say that's not for my generation. That was not an easy thing because there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of conflict behind that, personal internal conflict about what that was, because they basically, in some ways, and what, depending on where you placed yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you wanted the approval of white spaces and white institutions and white organizations who wanted that approval. So you did things to accommodate what they thought was valuable and important. And so I think uh, for me in particular, and I think my generation, that was a long journey, in terms of kind of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
about blackness in dance, because I mean, when you say, what I would say dance, when we say dance, we basically meant white dance,
White
and
dance. Mm-hmm.
white dance,
White
and so
dance. Right.
it's white dance, and so uh, to learning or getting or arriving at a place uh, where the presence of blackness in dance and in my dance in particular, I think that that became really important to me as I kind of grappled with and considered the notion of about communication. Who do I communicate? Who am I wanting to communicate to? And I think that process kind of started back with Khalifu Asamori. I think that's how you
Mm-hmm.
pronounce her name. With
Mm-hmm.
her project, Black Choreographers Moving Towards the 21st Century, which was back in the 90s, I think, sometime. I don't remember exactly when it was, but that was a pivotal moment for me in terms of my considering my blackness and my version of black dance. Because before then, I was completely kind of, I was deep into the downtown postmodernist kind of thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's fine because there were a couple of other black people that were
Mm-hmm.
like about five, you
Oh,
know,
you don't say those three other people.
yeah,
The other
for
black people.
people that were in the same thing. But I with that festival, I started to think about. I started to not apologize for being black. I think that's one way to put it. I think that my whole time in college at these elite white universities, I found myself always apologizing for being black, for being physically black, for being
Mm-hmm.
my black experience, my background, and always feeling that that was not enough, and that somehow I had to. It was a masquerade, and uh, and so I think with that festival, uh, uh, I started to come out. I started to come out of that, and start to move. I mean, one of the things was seeing during the festival was seeing urban bush women,
Mm-hmm.
and and what happened in some ways was it was really exhilarating and fantastic. But I mostly noticed how black people responded to that. You know, responded to what was happening. I was going, wow, that's amazing. The experiences that I had had up to that point, uh, it was not that sense. I mean, in downtown dancing, like I mean, that level of engagement by audiences was not present for the most part. I mean, they could be enthusiastic, but they not like what that was.
Not
And
yeah, not to
so,
that level.
and
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, I felt it wasn't because this thing, but sometimes at these white schools, people tell you you're not black enough,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
and in some ways, maybe I wasn't black enough. And how I mean in terms of seeing what was happening at the festival was that I didn't allow my blackness to express itself fully in the work that I did. It
Mm-hmm.
That didn't mean that I had to fit somebody else's notion of what blackness is. I just need to do what I thought blackness is, or what my blackness is. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, my blackness was big enough to include a lot of things, including the aspects of the European classical tradition, African dance, Indonesian dance, which later I kind of embraced.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of so in some ways, kind of world dance, other dance from other cultures, and that because and I would say, I mean, because now we talk about black excellence and black beauty, but I think black curiosity,
Mm.
that
Mm-hmm.
was the thing. Was a curious person at that age. I think I still am, but then I was
Yeah.
certainly very, very curious because I was trying to find my voice, my place, and so it was. Black choreographers moving towards the 21st century that in some ways, I want to say, plunged me into an exploration of my Blackness and how it might and could, ought to, should express itself.
The thing that I want to lift out of that is the idea of being unapologetically black in these white spaces. And given that there is obviously erasure going on, I mean the legacies. It's really difficult to keep the legacies of our black, our black people, our black, dance makers, and not just them, but some musicians and artists alive. Is that a solution or part of the thing that will help understanding that white spaces are created by white people? But is it something that will help for us to be more unapologetically black in the context of the art that we make and do in these spaces?
I I I think we have to, and I say we. Uh, I don't know what we should do, but I think, I mean, what I do is that I try not to be belligerent about it,
Okay.
or combat it.
Mm-hmm.
I try to, I am, is how I think. I just do it. And,
Okay.
because always there are people that are going, black or white people, going to push back with whatever you do or have
Sure.
opinions about what you
Mm-hmm.
do. That's human nature. And so I think um, that I mean, I think in order to do that, to be unapologetic about the work that you do, you have to do some personal stuff. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of time in therapy at one point in my life. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you need to do therapy so you can dig up, you can excavate all of those ghosts that are there that stops you from being fully expressive. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and ask yourself, or I have to ask myself, I have asked myself those really serious questions about being black, because certainly, I think I said in something at some point is that at a certain point in my life, no, James Baldwin said I identify so much with James Baldwin sometimes, but he
Mm-hmm.
said, like, if his generation, people were ambivalent about being black. And I think there was and so when you grow up in a black family, in the black community from back in the Jim Crow era and days, you were in fact ambivalent about being black. And so the
Mm-hmm.
thing, because, so the thing is how, so in some ways that's a version of internalized racism.
Sure.
And so my point being, doing therapy and stuff like that, you start to dig into and lean into all of those things that stopped I did to stop my blackness from fully expressing itself. And so,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted it to fully express itself, because it was a denial. To not do that was a denial of my history and who I am. So the thing is about erasure, that erasure is also self erasure. To accept and embrace all aspects of yourself, which
Sure.
includes your blackness.
The thing that stuck out for me is therapy because I've been in therapy lately, finally. and so yes,
Okay,
there's the getting to all of it, the me, the blackness, all of that does help with
right.
being more fully expressed.
Right. I mean, I think it's really interesting that the trauma of
Hmm.
racism
Yeah.
makes you need therapy. I think what James Baldwin said in the whole thing, he says that, he talks about the thing of being really, um, it makes you crazy. Racism makes black people crazy.
Hmm.
Anti-blackness make black people. I mean, we become so conflicted. We are like insane people. I used to think about back in the '60s, '70s. There, she's still alive, Adrienne Kennedy, a playwright, and she wrote a play. I think it was called "Funny House for a Negro," and uh, and it was about this black woman who had all of these multiple personalities, including the Queen of England and blah, blah, blah. And I used to think about that play. I mean, I was like 18, 19, and stuff. And so with that mind, I would think that's what happens when in this America with all this craziness and stuff, you get really you become insane, and so you start imagining, like Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye.
Yes.
That's a perfect example, I think, of that as well. And so,
Yeah.
um, so I think we have to work to Black people, Black artists, Black dancers, choreographers have to work to, I want to say, kind of to uncrazy yourself. In
Mm-hmm.
the negative part of uncrazy, in terms of the creativity and imagination part, then you keep that crazy. But the other part, the damaging negative parts of it, you have to work to do, because to to get rid of. So the idea about therapy or some kind of work or thoughtfulness about your
Mm-hmm.
life investigation. Sometimes you may not people may not need to do it in a formal kind of way, but
Mm-hmm.
it's about the expression about around an examined life. We have to take time to examine our
Examine.
lives so
Mm-hmm.
that we can get to something, so we're not just running on automatic about things. So back to the art part
Mm-hmm.
of all, it took that for me to get to a point where I felt like my blackness could express itself in the work, my blackness, not somebody else's blackness, my
Mm-hmm.
blackness. And so that meant that sometimes for some people it was going to be too black, and for other people it's not black enough, or it's not
Mm-hmm.
black in a way that I like or somebody likes or agrees with. But that's okay, because it's my blackness. And
Right.
so and uh, and that does not mean, for me, what that has meant is that I've grown to appreciate other manifestations of blackness in people's work and what they
Mm-hmm.
do and what they try to do. I mean, I think, to be really honest with you, the there was another other insightful moment, was
Uh-huh.
the first IABD conference I went to. That was kind of remarkable,
Mm-hmm.
uh, kind of experience.
IABD. Okay, I
Yeah.
just had to do
So anyway, that was, I don't know. I remember when that was. It was at Cleo's, and so that was a remarkable experience, being around all these Black people in dance, and because I think what I Black dance for me, in some ways, I mean, or organizations that were like that. I only knew Ailey in some ways, and Ailey was really inspirational. Like, as they say, Ailey turned me out. When I saw
it.
the Ailey
Right.
company for the first time, it was just like, oh, I mean, like seeing Black people in dance, that was a role model for me. That I said,
Right.
I want to be like that. When I saw Dudley Williams the first time, I go, that's me. I want to be like Dudley Williams. I mean, some of it had to do with not just that he was at the Ailey company at the time. He was the smallest man in there, the thinnest, and they were mostly kind of much bigger than.
Kind of.
And I
Yeah.
go, like, I could relate to his body.
Yeah.
Um, I could relate to the way he moved, his musicality, and I
Yeah.
go, that's how I want to be. So I think the celebration part of
Mm-hmm.
is an important uh, part of the Black experience in dance. Sometimes I used to think that, like, I would go, oh, this is kind of cheesy. Like, why are we celebrating? We know what we're about. Why are we celebrating? We don't need to celebrate. We know it
It's
already.
redundant. It's
It's
redundant.
redundant. It's
Yeah.
redundant. And the thing is, what I've started, it's not redundant. And
Right.
especially when you see at the like young people, they need that, because many of these
Yes.
young people are at these dance studios and places where who they are, what they're about, their culture, where they're from, is not celebrated or even acknowledged. And
Mm-hmm.
so uh, it's really important. But also, I think it it reminds me of that, perhaps, that all dance, Black dance in particular, is rooted in community, and that
Sure.
uh, and sometimes you forget that. I mean,
Yeah.
I forget that. I mean, the kind of white dance hierarchy says that dance is separated from community, or either there are small internal communities that you kind of, like, what do you
Right.
call them, like-minded,
Sure.
you know
Sure.
like,
Yeah. They feel very niche almost.
that's right. That's right. So there's no big sense of community, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think, for me, uh, the being around black uh, organizations with artists, black people, or conferences like IABD. It's like I'm just reminded of really basic things that I value, but often I forget that I value them,
Hmm.
or there is no expression for them in the
Sure.
world for me.
Who are the people, or do you have people who pop into mind that are maybe not so famous, but maybe not so obscure even, who have informed or inspired you in black dance spaces, and from before? I mean, obviously there are people here still on the planet probably who have, but are there people that we shouldn't that we should know about, that we should, you know I mean, a lot of us
Yeah,
probably do know about them, but still that have had some kind of impact on you.
yeah. I mean, yes. I think, as you say, there are a lot of people still here or that everybody knows about already. I
Mm-hmm.
think, I mean, I mentioned Alvin Ailey,
Mm-hmm.
and then people associated with the Ailey organization because
Ah.
I was at the school and stuff. And so, people like Sylvia Waters, with whom I'm still friendly with, and who
Sure.
I've known since my days at the Ailey School. But there are also people like who ran the Ailey organizations, like Ivy Clark, uh, and who, I mean, the thing about the Ailey organization that is always interesting to me is that the number of people who work to make that organization survive, that company survive, and who like gave their everything to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are also people. I mean, they're artists. I mean, for me, like back in those days, in the late '60s and '70s in New York, I mean, like Elio was still around,
Mm-hmm.
and that, I mean, that was just that. Talk about unapologetic. That's what that was.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
because the Ailey Company in some ways was black respectability, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's not what he was about at all.
No.
That not
No.
what he was about at all.
Mm-mm.
And I think
Mm-mm.
uh, I think people like George Faison kind of was in the middle somewhere because he could
Mm-hmm.
be really. I mean, he made dances that were easily accessible because he
Sure.
was interested in the commercial theater and dance and stuff. But also, his sometimes he could be, uh, uh, he could be, he could feel not harsh. That's not the word I'm looking for. He could feel abrupt,
Uh-huh.
in terms of how he could. I'll say it this way: how he could insert the black vernacular into his engaging with you, and so suddenly he would go to
Write
this.
that down to me. Right. That's a good way to put that. Write that down.
He would kind of go to these places, and you kind of go, "Oh, okay, I better wake up." Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so, I mean, and then you know, I think people like Fred Benjamin, who's not here anymore, was
Fred
really
Benjamin.
important to a lot of dancers of my generation.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think there are, uh, I mean, one of the things that people I've kind of grown over the years to kind of really just kind of be over the moon about is Brenda Dixon Godchild.
Oh yes.
And like there's a certain song, I'm saying this way, that she's been singing for decades and people
Mm-hmm.
are finally hearing it and catching up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then I mentioned Hulu. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's a kind of life and that and uh, that has not been fully acknowledged in in its completeness and what
Agreed.
you know I think,
Agreed.
I mean, I think also people like Nikki Shepard, who used to
Mm-hmm.
be at 651. It's not just the people that are that are in the forefront, or not the forefront, that are are highly visible, but sometimes there are people that are in the background. I mean, there's certainly people in my life that have been really important. That Christine Lawson, who was the dean of the dance school at Cal Arts, she was
Arts.
a big supporter and advocate for me. I
Okay.
was kind of really big. admirer of Rod Rogers,
Yes.
and
Lula is too. Lula is
yeah,
too.
and I just I think somebody is taking care of his work. There's a uh, that I would like to see that work be done again. I mean, at one point I proposed a program. I don't know who I was proposing to, but it was a program of kind of the people who were the Black artists who were not doing quote unquote traditional Black dance
Mm-hmm.
in. So it would be like Rod Rogers, Gus Solomons Jr.,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's almost
Diane McIntyre. I mean, people have started to move Diane into the Black canon, so to speak, now
Mm-hmm.
that they
Yeah.
understand what she's doing and because she's continued to do it, and
Mm-hmm.
also her relationship to jazz music early on and stuff, and so they kind of understand it better. Uh, but I mean, and there, I'm trying to think. There was one other person that I can't think of right now who had a company up in Harlem. Uh, but you know, and it was interesting also that a lot of times it I was going to say it was the black women that tended to disappear in New York in terms of the dance scene,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, as opposed to the people like the founders of IABD who were in other cities that
Sure.
they were able to kind of figure out ways to survive and have the work that they did, whether it was choreographic work or they're working on the idea of a repository for Black dance and Black culture to to exist. And so um,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that was all I wanted to
Yeah.
say about.
No, black women. Wow, I did not realize that. Black women in that erasure was especially
In New
um,
York City.
in New York City for black women. I didn't know that. I had no idea that was going on.
I mean, I know I'm leaving people out. You know,
Sure.
it's
I
kind of
mean,
like
there.
you're at the award ceremony, and I want to think,
It's
I want
time
to
to
think,
thank.
I want
Yes.
to think. Yeah, yeah. You're always
Yes.
going to
You're gonna
leave
always
somebody out.
leave
Always,
somebody
and
out.
all those people that I forgot to mention. You know,
I
so
apologize.
so I yes, so I think uh, I would say. Uh, None of us, and I certainly, it's true for myself, would be where we are in all of the goodness of it and sometimes the not so much goodness of it without, there's always a lot of people in the background that have helped for me, for us to arrive at certain places. I just have to remember that, you know, because I think part of the myth of American what's the phrase? Not uniqueness, American
Exceptionalism or.
exceptionalism, and
Hmm.
it is a myth. It says that you do it all by yourself, that you do, and there is
Yes.
no such thing.
No, yeah.
You know, I mean, and sometimes the way the expressions of things like it takes a village, and you know, like I mean, I understand that's a way for it to stick for people, but it's much simpler than that, and it's also more complicated than that, and complex than
Yeah.
that. I mean, I
Yeah.
certainly uh, the journey that my life has been on, I certainly would not be here without other people. I
Hmm.
mean, really would not. Sometimes I'd like to pretend I did it all by myself. That it's me, you know, like I'm so fabulous and so blah blah
Yes.
blah. And so, you know, like I'm just all this. And I know that's not true.
Right. Right.
No, it's absolutely not true. But that's part of the myth of buying into the American exceptionalism notion.
Sure.
And I think um, and I think that and I think what that does when one buys into that, it stops you in that not being acknowledged, able to acknowledge other people or not knowing how. That leads to a kind of erasure too. We're kind of back to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You erase part of your history, your past, those that support you, you know,
Hmm.
um, and so one of the things I'm so happy about, I'm really happy about aging, is that this and when I say nostalgia, I don't mean nostalgia for stuff that's not real, but
Uh huh.
nostalgia for it, you know, for the people in my life in the past that have contributed to who I am. I am so happy about that, to finally being at a place where I take some time and I think about it, think about what this person did for me or how they supported me. And I realized that one of the things that I really appreciate uh,
Mm-hmm.
is I appreciate kindness,
Mm-hmm.
people that have been kind to me. And sometimes the kindness manifests itself in really small ways, and other times in really big gestures.
Mm-hmm.
And and I realized that in some ways I wouldn't have survived
Uh-huh.
without those kindnesses. Whether physically survive, emotionally survive, psychically survive. It
Mm-hmm.
just I would not have. I just
Yeah.
I wouldn't have. I don't. I, and it's kind of like thinking like in hindsight, in some ways, I didn't realize life was so hard. I mean, and it's not just the food, but like all the stuff you have to kind of like it's your external world and your internal world that
Internal.
you have
Mm-hmm.
to your interior life that you
Yeah.
have to manage, and the interior life is just as hard as what happens on the outside. And
Sure.
so, or it's hard, maybe not just
Yeah.
as hard, but it's hard in a different way, and that they all have to be dealt with. Both lives you have to deal with. Um,
Right. Right. That's the well. Good on you for being able to find all of those moments, the big and the small ones, of kindness, or and acknowledge them, and then see the way that they've helped. That's a gift too. In what ways do you think that you are currently rebelling against erasure?
One of the things that happens in the that in the white ecosystem in terms of relationship with black dance, and it's related to if there can only be one,
Mm-hmm.
and
Room
then
for
kind
one.
of
Only
go
room
right
for one.
down. But so there's also this thing of uh, what the kind of dance we are supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
white artists get to do any kind of dance or any kind of thing they want to do, but black people, you need to do dance that looks like this, and
Sure.
that is up. And if it doesn't look like that,
That
then
matches our expectations.
yeah, exactly. And otherwise, we're not interested. So I
Sure.
think uh, that's one of the things that contributes to erasure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think, and you know what? And I think this is an ongoing struggle. It's not going to go away. I don't think why should we have it? Why should I or anybody should have an expectation it's going to disappear right away? But I think what the thing is, and you hear young people saying it all the time, is this it's an ongoing struggle. That is what we will have to do. We
Sure.
always have to be in that fight. Always have to
Mm-hmm.
be in that fight all the time.
Yeah. Well, Donald Byrd, thank you. Thank you for your time and for joining us this morning and for suffering me, even though you didn't know it was going to be me.
I did not. I didn't read that teaches. I should read the emails thoroughly. I didn't know until this morning when I read it. It says Jamal. Yes,
Well, it's great because there's some subtle forms of torture that you're really, really, really masterful at with me that you didn't have a chance to really.
I
So
didn't
this
do that.
is
Yeah,
it's been great. It's been great. Thank you so much for being here with us at IABD.
that was my pleasure. I was amazingly surprised when I was asked, and thrilled to be able to do it. So
Yeah,
it was my
cool.
pleasure.
Absolutely.
Hello, my name is Donald Byrd. I'm a choreographer and the artistic director of Spectrum Dance Theater in Seattle, Washington. We will not be erased.